Hello everybody, welcome to Kelly's Garden Adventures. Today we're going to talk about tomatoes. And I've planted a lot of tomatoes already, but I like to just keep planting them throughout the season. So that way I have tomatoes from in a couple months to all the way to maybe October or November if it's warm enough. Some of the tomatoes I like is a cherry tomato. I like the Sweet 100 cherry tomatoes, but any kind of cherry tomatoes are really good, or a grape tomato. Just something really small that you can just sort of put near like gates or right in the beginning of your garden, or just anywhere access to where you're just coming and going. So that way if you want a little snack, you can just sort of pop them off the plant and just eat them right there. You don't have to have a knife to slice them up. You can just sort of pick them right off the plants. And you can also put them in salads whole. You have to chop them up if you don't want to. Another thing I'll do is just saute them in vegetables. And when you saute the tomatoes, it almost like caramelizes. So it's like really sweet, almost like a dessert. I almost think it's like nature's candy. That's why I really like them. Just so they're so convenient. And another option I like with tomatoes is making paste and making sauces. If I'm going to have sauces for spaghetti or any other kind of pastas, I like to either go with the Roma tomatoes or the San Marzano tomatoes. And what I like about the the Romas and the San Marzanos is it's a thicker, there's less juice, and it's like a thicker tomato. And that way when you're boiling them down, you don't have to boil them down as much. And they will be a compact plant. So usually I will plant like 3 or 4 at a time, because they are determinate. So with determinates, once they fruit, and then they're done. So they all basically come ripe all at the same time. That way if you need like 5-6 pounds of tomatoes, they'll all be just done right almost at the same time. That way you don't have to keep grabbing them throughout the season. Hopefully they don't rot. They'll all just come right then. And what I like about also is being that some of them are determinate, you just sort of put them in pots, or you can put them in the ground. Some of the indeterminate ones, if they're indeterminate plants, then you're probably best in a raised garden or the ground, just so you stake them up, because they'll just keep growing until the season's over. But yeah, that's what I like about Romas. And I'll also chop them up and put them in salads, or I'll just eat them whole, or anything like that. And I do like the thicker tomatoes sometimes when I'm just eating them in a salad instead of having less juice. But it kind of depends on what you like, and everything like that. But and the third option for tomatoes I like is slicers. Having a nice beefsteak slicer, or a giant Goliath, and those are going to be like your big tomatoes that you're going to be able to slice them for sandwiches, anything like that. You can make these into paste. You can make just about any tomato into paste. It just depends on the cooking time that you have. But these specific ones are indeterminates, so they will continue to grow until the season's over, and they'll die off. So a lot of these times I will, on these tomatoes, I'll plant some now, and I'll plant maybe a few more, maybe a month later, maybe a little less, and just have them just keep growing and keep growing until the season's over and the frost just sort of kills everything. Because one thing about tomatoes is they will grow a lot of tomatoes. So if you grow them all at once, then all of a sudden you're having like 300-400 tomatoes all at once, and you're trying to figure out how to eat them or how to deal with them until they go bad. So, but if you plant them, throughout the season, just a few here, a few there, and you'll be able to have tomatoes for 5-6 months, kind of depending on where you live and when the frost starts and like that. So, yeah, so definitely, beefsteaks are really good for sandwiches and everything like that. And when they're homegrown, they're almost like 10 times better than you'll ever get into a store. Just because you're putting the love into it. You're putting everything that you want into the tomato plant that you want into it. You have full control over it, so which is really nice. And another tomato I will grow like first thing is, I know a lot of people may not talk about it, but it's the early grow tomato or the super early grow tomato. And I like to look at the backs of the tomato plants and see how long it will take for them to fruit up. And I will want to, my first seasons, maybe I'll grab a tomato that's okay, it's pretty good, better, definitely better than the stores, but maybe it's not the best one, but it grows fast. And that way I can get an early harvest of tomatoes. And that way, even though maybe the ones that are my favorite, it might take 80 or 90 days, and I might not get them. If I get different varieties that maybe will grow in 65 or 70 days, I will have an extra week of tomatoes. And it may not be my favorite, but it will be delicious. And so that's another thing you have to look on tomatoes, is how long they will take to fruit up. Are they indeterminate? Will they all come all at once? Will they all just sort of gradually come throughout the season? And you can sort of just experiment. But yeah, those are 3 kind of varieties I like. The small ones you can sort of eat on the go. The paste tomatoes like the Romas or the San Marzanos that you can just sort of make into pasta sauces. And there's so many different ways you can eat tomatoes. But also the slicer tomatoes that you can put on sandwiches. And we're going to be like really huge, and then you'll have just a nice, tomato right from bread to bread, and that way, what I like about slicers is, one tomato will just fit the entire bread. They'll be so huge. But you can also grow different ones like, and what I'm experimenting this year with is Cherokee tomato, or Cherokee purple, sorry. And it's an heirloom tomato, but it's sort of like a purplish tomato. I usually eat more along the lines of red tomatoes, but I will experiment with different ones like the Black Prince, and there's like a German Queen that's like a pinkish tomato. What I will do is I will grab the ones that I usually like, I know I love, and I will plant those, and then I'll grab maybe 1 or 2 tomatoes that maybe I've never tried before, and I want to see how they taste. Because people could tell you how they taste all day long, but until you taste it, you'll never know if you really you love it or if it's okay. Or I think they'll all be delicious, but it just kind of depends on your taste. Some people might not like the purples or the pinks, and they just want traditional red, which is great. That's why experimenting with different tomatoes and to see what you like, and that way, year after year, it sort of gets better and better, and until you get to the point where I know these are the tomatoes I like, and these are the ones I'm going to grow, and I'm going to have a great season. Another thing I do is put them in my book here, so that way when I look at them, I can kind of see, and you can separate them, and by indeterminate, determinate, paste sauce, slicers, cherry tomatoes, kind of depends how you want, and that way you can kind of see, okay, these are the 6 slicers. Which ones do I like? Which ones do I want to try out? And that way you'll be able to just sort of make it easy on you. And then when you're planting tomatoes, you want to make sure that it's it looks healthy. You're gonna have a lot of these sucker branches that you can just sort of pick off and everything like that. But I've never had tomato plants. I know it could be hard, it could be easy. It depends on how you grow, but I've always had, I figure that tomatoes are one of the ones that it'll grow something. And over the years, maybe you'll be able to increase the yield. But I've always had pretty good success with this compared to maybe some other vegetables that I may not get barely anything off of it. But when I'm planting my tomatoes in a raised garden or the ground, I like to have them in nice rows, so that way I can kind of see what I have. I'll look at the sun to see where they're going to get the most sun. What kind of tomatoes I have. Indeterminates will get a lot taller than the determinates will, so I don't want them to try to block the determinate tomatoes with the sun. And I will plant them in rows like slicers, paste tomatoes, then maybe cherry tomatoes, or if I got an earlier tomato, like an early grow, I'll plant those in front, so that way I can kind of see where my tomatoes are, how many tomatoes I'm going to get, and that way I can deal with each kind of tomato as I go. And then I will put straw on the ground because they require a lot of water, and if I put the straw, the mulch on the ground, it'll help keep the water into the ground instead of evaporating out. And also, when you water the tomatoes, when it hits the straw, it's less likely to splash up the soil onto the leaves, which will cause a disease into the leaves, which will hurt the tomatoes. But yeah, so I like to be able to just keep them so that way I know where they're at, and I'll put lavenders next to them. The one good thing about tomatoes is they don't require the bees or butterflies or any kind of insects to pollinate them. When they start flowering, you can just sort of shake the flowers and they'll self-pollinate themselves. So sometimes I will come out and just sort of shake the branches once I see the flowers start blooming, and they'll just pollinate themselves, and I'll just keep checking on them, keep shaking them, and make sure that they have the right amount of water. You want to make sure that that you don't have too much water or too less. You kind of want to just stick your finger in the ground or check the soil and to see what kind of, how much water is into the ground. Tomatoes do take up a lot of resources, so you want to make sure that they're not too close to a lot of things. I'll put marigolds and different flowers next to them, but you want to make sure that they're compatible with anything you grow, because they do require a lot of water, a lot of nutrients, and you want to make sure that no other plants suffer from being too close to the tomatoes. And you want to make sure that, because they will take up a lot of room, and that they won't shade anything. And if you do that and you just check up on the water, check up on the nutrients, maybe fertilize halfway through the season, you'll have great success. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.